So let me introduce Paul Resta and then Jeanne Milliken Bonds. And Paul, as many of you who know in my work at the National Collaborative for Digital Equity, that collaborative would not exist were it not for the patience, perseverance, and sense of humor of Dr. Paul Resta from University of Texas, Austin. He is very quietly has been a national leader and pioneer in technology for learning opportunities in high poverty communities in all kinds of diverse cultural contexts. You didn't know I was going to say this, did you? And he was the founding president of the International Society for Technology and Education years ago. It's celebrating its anniversary. It's 40 years. The International Society for Technology and Education is a national pioneer in this space on technology for learning, and Paul has been really instrumental in that. And again, I just want to thank Paul for his sense of humor and all the calls we've had brainstorming about trying to nurture this ecosystem that we're all helping to bring together today. And Jeanne Milliken Bonds is with the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, and she's an expert in a senior leader at the Richmond Fed, is an expert in community development broadly, and also has deep expertise, nationally significant expertise. I don't think you expected I was going to say that because that's not in your bio, but it's really, I happen to know it's true, around CRA investments in broadband, and is doing some very exciting work in the Carolinas, and she's a national leader on several national committees around community economic opportunity, and it's really a pleasure to have you all here. And that said, if Paul, you want to take it away, you each have a copy of discussion questions. Is that, let me just turn that on. I'll swap you. It's yours.
Okay.
Has your
Well, this segment is really going to be a conversation that we'll have with our wonderful guests who bring, as you've already heard from Barry Whitus, intensive, deep expertise, relating to issues of CRA, and our particular focus, obviously, in our conversation is going to be talking about CRA investments relating to digital equity. And you both have some questions here, and actually these are questions that have consistently surfaced in our state summits. We've done a number of state summits on digital equity, and so we just wanted to have this wonderful opportunity to have a conversation with you, and I'll just kind of start this ball rolling by sharing some of the questions that they have. And one of the things that I think would be really useful for us to understand is to what extent do you see the digital divide barriers as impediments to economic inclusion? Obviously this is an area that we're very focused on, but we'd really love your perspective on that as well.
Well, let me first say that the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond's district is Maryland, D.C., most of West Virginia, Virginia, North and South Carolina. And then I have colleagues across the country at the other reserve banks who do the same type of work, so I may refer to them occasionally. And then we have a board of governors here in D.C., and there's a staff there that also does the work. So in my district, and I know in other Federal Reserve districts, it's very much a component in economic inclusion. Right now, there's a cohort of southern cities that stretch across our district as well as the Atlanta and St. Louis district, and we're working on some of those historical, legal, political barriers that there are in place to economic inclusion. And every time the group convenes digital comes up in that, whether it's a concentrated urban area or whether it's out in a smaller town or rural area. There seem to always be people without access, which is number one piece. And then if they do have access, maybe they don't have the right access that gives them the ability to connect to the right application, whether it's education or health. Or they might have that, but they don't know how to use it. So it'll be one or all three of those factors that come in. So very much looking at low and moderate income communities in my district, that, you know, the economic inclusion is a huge issue, and digital is just a major piece of that.
Well, I mentioned this in my remarks, but I'll just emphasize again. I think that as banking moves more towards a digital platform, and unfortunately as fewer people are using branches, banks' are willingness to keep those underutilized branches open is just going to lead to fewer branches, and the difficulty, particularly if you're in a rural community, in getting to one of those branches is going to be more challenging. So the need to have an online literate population capable of using the technology to access your banking services really is, in my opinion, the digital inclusion, financial inclusion issue, facing our banks, the biggest one. And if CRA's primary goal back in the day when it was passed by Congress was to ensure financial access for people living in low and moderate income and heavy minority and distressed urban communities, and rural communities. That was the basis for CRA 40 some odd years ago. The challenge now isn't that they can't access a bank as much as it is that they might not be technologically or may not have the access to the technology to use those bank services. And so we need to be mindful of that, and I honestly think that banks are really moving in that direction. I think Krista's coming here from the American Bankers Association, and some of the work that I've done with some of the members of the American Bankers Association and conferences that I've spoke at really led me to believe that this is an opportune moment for those of you in this room to begin that dialogue with the banks.
In working with the communities, working with bankers, community education development leaders, and other community leaders, are you also getting a sense from them that they are seeing this digital divide as looming as of greater importance, within the last, say, 5 or 10 years? Or is more of that perception coming, from, the national level as opposed from the community perspective?
Well, I think as Barry said, banking's moving towards a technology platform like most things in our economy. So banks understand that their customers are going to use those applications. So I think they're genuinely interested. They see this as an opportunity. I know in my district, we've done a number of training sessions. Every reserve district can organize its community development, a little differently depending on what their district's like. But in ours, we have bankers collaboratives, where we work with the FDIC and the OCC, and we bring bankers together and we talk about topics. So we've had a number of training sessions on workforce and broadband per the guidance of 2016, and we do that regularly. We also bring in groups and let them talk about what they're doing and how the banks could partner with it. We do that as a facilitation mechanism to make those introductions that you all were talking about previously. And they're genuinely interested. They've attended the training sessions, and they've come to programs like this, and I think that they're genuinely interested. They're just looking to make that connection. CRA is relational. It can also be innovative. And so I think they're just looking for those projects, and it's up to us to help facilitate more of these speed dating or networking sessions so that they can make a match on what they would like to do.
Well, are there some key messages? When we first started having conversations with banks like 3 years ago, when we talk about digital equity, we were kind of getting blank stares. And now, there's been very robust movement in this area. So do you feel like the banking leaders are certainly knowledgeable about digital equity as being CRA permissible for investments, or are there some more work to be done in getting messages out to the banking community that investments in digital equity are certainly in accord with CRA purposes?
Well, we've certainly tried to get to forums like this, and I've been to bankers' conferences as well talking about this subject. We put out a video describing a way that banks were involved in financing, broadband in rural communities. We put out a publication I mentioned during my remarks. So we're definitely trying to get the word out. And then by doing this modern CRA modernization initiative, we hope to further educate bankers about things that they could get CRA credit for that they might have been uncertain about. And we hope to create a mechanism under this new framework where, bankers and others can submit inquiries to us and get, very quick responses as to whether or not it's CRA eligible. I know you have some items that you wanted to discuss today. Right now we go through like an every 5-year process to update our policies. We call them the interagency questions and answers, and that's in 2016 when we put out the policy that talked about, eligibility for certain types of digital and broadband. But that had been an issue that had been presented to us 3 or 4 years earlier, and it took us like 4 years to get the policy out and in the public. And so we're hoping under a modernized CRA framework, it could happen, within a matter of days or weeks to get clarification, to put it on our website and to make everyone aware of it, and then showing best practices and case studies through our publications, on a much more rapid basis than what we've had in the past, where you have to wait 4 years to qualify something, especially in an economy and in a technology that is changing as rapidly and becoming as critical to our daily lives, and one's ability to be financially included and economically included is broadband.
So I think that's very exciting. What I think I'm hearing you say is that, as Carol was raising the issue about the need for research on effective CRA strategies, and NCDE, when we've been focusing on this area, we were looking to see, is there a repository, of information on best practices, most effective strategies, sharing information on impact, and even that it's CRA eligible to do research on the impact of CRA investments in digital equity.
Well, I'll take that, and then maybe Jeanne wants to add. But so research, that's not mentioned in our CRA Q's and A's today. It's not a topic. We don't mention that at all. We know of some organizations that are doing research with grants that are receiving from banks, with those organizations having their primary mission, to be a lender or to provide programs geared to, LMI persons, in the financial services, financial inclusion space. So, maybe in that particular setting where a bank provides $1 million grant or a $100,000 grant to an organization that's doing, digital financial literacy type training, and then the organization prepares a report, summarizing its outcomes as part of the grant money. It's part of an overall program, but I don't think that, a situation where a university professor goes to a bank and says, will you give me a $50,000 grant to study financial literacy and digital inclusion, that is not mentioned today, and I don't think that would qualify. But as part of a program that's already providing the service and they're studying and publicizing the results, and some of the money from the grant went to doing that research, I think a situation like that, the larger grant applies. So that's how I see it today.
Yeah, I think that would be great if, they would understand as part of a grant that you'd include a component for doing research or evaluation of that as well. So thank you for sharing that. The other thing that NCDE, has been, observing is, and we've been very excited that we're seeing CRA investments, in broadband, and you both have, talked about that today. But, there's other aspects of digital, to move towards digital equity beyond simply having access to broadband. And, it's, as we've seen with Bob, tech support, training, and you're pointing that out, and a number of other elements. And so would either of you share with us, what you're thinking or what you're perceiving might be happening in terms of considering these other essential elements, to move towards digital equity, beyond broadband?
So I think, so I said earlier, CRA is relational. I also think that half of your challenge is to find all the resources that are out there. So Barry talked about the OCC. In the Federal Reserve, each reserve bank, again, can organize its community development how it sees fit. But we do a lot of research. So we're trying to pull together some solid examples. Now, we've been doing frameworks. So Barry mentioned they had a video. I think FDIC has a video on broadband as well. You can go to this place called fedcommunities.org, and it's all the reserve banks. And it's got a good search bar so you can type in. But we've been doing frameworks to help banks as well as communities figure out, what can work in there. And ironically, on the learning how to use technology side, there's a lot of money at the federal level through NTIA and USDA for the infrastructure, but there's not a lot of money for that applicability. But there are some solid examples out there of banks participating in collaboratives, looking at that training. Again, it benefits them. If their platforms are going towards that, having a digitally literate potential customers is helpful to them. So I would just say you can go to that site, you can take a look. There's some examples. I think we also have a place called investinwork.org, which is our collaborative on workforce. It's a separate site, and we've got some information on broadband there. And then a group of us are writing up some cases now, some examples, and our plan is to figure out how we're going to share those easily. But at least at a minimum right now, you can go to those sites and check out some examples.
Yeah, so what we'd like to do is we'll get those sites and then we'll share it to all of the participants here at the conference. Well, you know, this is conversational, so part of the conversation is opening this up to our participants here. So there's a question back there. You can.
Hi, my name is Bonnie Bracy Sutton. I had the pleasure of working with President Clinton on the National Information Structure. And people said, what is that? NIAA what? And that's what people say when I say CRA. They say, what? Can you explain it to me? I can't get my head around it. I don't know what it means. And there's some people I've talked to about it 5 times, and they still don't get it. I was wondering if there's some kind of partnership you could make with a group or foundation or organization that would create a case studies thing where we'd have a definition, some case studies of where some of the projects are. I know where one is in Montana, but that's because I went to Montana, okay? How do we know what's out there? And then another thing, my husband and I are working with the elderly. I'm elderly. Let me tell you something. My bank is giving me heck. I had to use the FTC to make them understand that I couldn't talk to Colorado, New York, and all these other places. So the elderly are not getting served, and they are the ones who are most unlikely to be digitally included. What, is anyone doing anything with them? Too many questions, I know that, sorry. But he brought up so many great ideas.
Well, I will say this, the Future Edge initiative that I mentioned from Capital One is also geared towards seniors. The example I gave involved a student, but it's a $150 million program over 5 years from one of the largest banks in the country. So that would be one initiative that I would definitely encourage you to try to connect with and see if there's a partnership that can be developed with that initiative in senior citizens. The other initiative that I mentioned, the HUD initiative, Connect Home, that affects public housing residents. Public housing residents are of all ages, and the lack of internet access in many of those projects affects seniors and students and everybody in between. So those are 2 initiatives that I would encourage you to pursue. And then I mentioned earlier, the OCC has a lot of materials on our website that provide case studies and examples. I mentioned the one publication and video we put out on internet access and ways that banks can be involved. But we have all kinds of primers on how to use CRA, what CRA is for, the CRA for Dummies video that the Federal Reserve put together, which is a very good video. And so there's a lot of good resources, a lot of best practices. Definitely encourage you to check those out.
Yeah, I think, so as Barry mentioned, there are a lot of categories. We have videos on fedcommunities.org. I think FDIC, OCC, and the Federal Reserve in our districts are always open to doing CRA for community groups to help, dive into that. We like to use those videos so you get a little primer, then you can come to the class and we can dive into that. I think now, as far as the question about the seniors, there's a lot of discussions taking place in the opportunity zones, which are also low-income census tracts, as people think about real estate and what goes into the real estate. A lot of those have some pieces that have some senior care options in there, and the funds that I've talked to in those areas are already thinking about how they're going to wire some of those facilities. So I think broadband is top of mind in those discussions. Banks are in those discussions because it's not going to all happen with equity investment. There's going to be lending and grants and other things that make the projects. So I think we're going to end up with some good examples that we're going to write up. And like I said, they're out there now. You just have to go to a couple places and do some searches to find those. But I think as we acquire more of those, I know what I've tried to do is look at actually follow the money. So create pathways for how the money actually flows and what tools are used. And I think that's incredibly helpful for communities to not just hear about it, but visually see how a project might come together. So I think we're going to see more of that in the future.
Another question? Oh, okay. Ann? And if you all would introduce yourself, please, and your organization.
Ann Flynn, National School Boards Association. So in the credits that banks receive for CRA work, is more of that currently like in a philanthropic component of the bank's work, or is it in the lending side, or is it some combination of the two?
I would say most of it is in the investment side, and it's for those banks, as I mentioned earlier, sort of more than $1.2 billion in assets. They have a investment test that they're evaluated that represents 25% of their rating. And then within their investments, that's where the grant making can fit. If it's an eligible community service or an eligible community development activity. There are opportunities for loans. The gentleman asked a question about whether a bank could get CRA credit for providing financing for a build out for an underserved or distressed area in a community that doesn't have broadband. That could potentially be an example of a loan, or maybe the bank invests equity. If it's the video that we did that described a real deal, and I would really encourage you to look at it because it's on our website. It's a rural Minnesota community. They formed a cooperative amongst 14 towns, townships, and bankers were both investors in this cooperative as well as lenders. So there are a lot of ways, just depending on what you're trying to achieve, that a bank can get CRA credit. But in the philanthropic space, it's the investment for that donation.
I'd like to raise a question that actually came to our attention, and our dear friends at NSBA brought that to our attention. But every school district and every university and community college, they have a significant relationship with a bank, and so what we're trying to do is offer advice in terms of how to approach the bank in terms of sort of developing a collaborative approach to work together to address the digital divide. And so any advice either of you could offer in this area would be helpful.
Well, I always tell groups to start with who they have a relationship with. So who they bank with, what, bankers sit on all types of boards. They might be on an education committee of the chamber, or they might be on the chamber board or some other task force. So whoever you have a relationship with, and then, put your idea down on one page, one piece of paper. CRA is, it is data driven. So if you've got some data that shows your idea is going to target that low and moderate income, that's definitely going to help with the bank. I also tell people go to the bank early in the year, so the first and second quarters of the year. They do their plan the year before, they start executing it. The longer you go in the year, the longer it might be drawn out. So if you can go in the first and second quarter of the year, that is a good idea. The bank isn't always looking for CRA credit. Surprise. Sometimes they just want to do good. I mean, I worked on the North Carolina Information Highway in the 90s, and banks were involved in that layout in North Carolina, and that was well before CRA consideration. So a bank might be interested in your project regardless of whether they get CRA credit just to be a good corporate citizen, just because they're interested in that education piece of it. But I just start with that relationship. Frame up your idea, go to them. If you don't have a relationship and you can't find someone, you can call the OCC offices, you can call the Federal Reserve Bank, you can call the FDIC, and we can help connect you and make that possible. I will tout a project out of the Kansas City Federal Reserve. It's called Investment Connection, where they've created a technology platform where groups can submit their projects and the examiners review those projects, kind of, thumbs up, thumbs down, whether it looks like it would qualify. And so they're doing some matchmaking electronically. I still do it the old-fashioned way in my district, where I put people in a room together and get them to connect. So if you call me or my colleagues, we're happy to work with the other regulators and make something like that happen.
All of our questions have been focused on, you have one back there? Yeah.
A customer here.
Thank you. Blake West with the National Education Association. First, I was very thrilled to hear our colleague from Fort Wayne talk about community schools and the work that they're doing there. That, to me, has been the most powerful transformation that we've seen in schools across the country. And so I'm wondering if you've possibly seen how various organizations, including community organizations, might be using the Community Reinvestment Act to help them get the necessary impetus to get community schools off the ground, sometimes uniting partners that have not previously been partners.
Well, if you're referring to charter, what we call charter schools here in DC, because that's actually a funded mandate from the district, where if you start a school and you enroll a student, they get a certain amount of money automatically. So banks have been very involved in purchasing the new markets tax credits that a lot of jurisdictions are using to fund these charter schools. So that is a brick and mortar financing program. Not as familiar with philanthropy, although I have seen and heard that some banks, particularly at the community bank level, if they're involved in financing a charter school through the purchase of the new markets, and they may have provided a loan, for the construction, and they now have a business relationship, with that school, that there may be a desire to do some philanthropy or do some student bank volunteer activities together, like that Capital One initiative where I mentioned the Capital One employees are actually doing coding training for middle schoolers. So that would be the kind of thing that you might want to pursue with a bank.
And just to clarify, I really was not referring to charter schools, but rather community schools. It's an effort whereby the school becomes really the hub for both the health and well-being, the economic development, and the educational development of all members of the community. And there are some instances in which charter schools have tried to follow this model, but it's a more specific model that has several pillars as to what kinds of characteristics they have and how they bring the entire community to use that resource in an integrated fashion.
Well, that's interesting. I would say around the DC area, where I'm most familiar, you don't see that in the public schools, but you do see that in the charter schools. Just by virtue of the nature that the charter schools have boards, and some bankers serve on the boards of the charter schools, and it just sort of becomes a holistic joint effort by engaging the banker and the business leaders in some of those communities in the operation of the school, because it started with them being a lender for the school, an investor in the school, a member of the board, and a volunteer option. So not to say that it can't, and I'm sure it does happen in public schools, but I'm most familiar with it happening in the charter school context.
And I would just add, you also see that in the model for purpose-built communities as well, where they're maybe not creating a new community school, but they're teaming up with the schools in that area and bringing them into that model and using it more holistically for the community. So I've seen some examples with that model as well.
Again, my name is Letitia Dowling from Grant Makers for Education. And one of the things that we've done within our organization with our grant makers is we've done a mapping to show where funding has occurred. And we've done that to kind of identify the gaps where funding is not occurring, to kind of guide our funders of where those gaps exist. So as I hear you talk and think about the digital equity piece, has the Federal Reserve or the OCC, I know that you kind of have a tool that indicates whether they're satisfactory or unsatisfactory. Have you ever thought about doing the research to determine where those gaps are? Because what I'm hearing is like in my area, South Carolina, that Atlanta is the region. We found that our funders get comfortable funding those that they know of, they know their projects work. And so then those other banks who are further away, they don't even, I guess, adopt the CRA because this region is meeting it through Atlanta's work. And so it doesn't filter down to South Carolina. So as I'm thinking about how do you address the equity and make an impact, have you ever done any research about where is it just not happening and how your organizations can help more of that happen?
So we have, so Letitia, we need to talk afterwards because you're also in my Federal Reserve District and I'm in South Carolina like once a week. So we can talk about some things that are going on there. But we do have a piece of research coming out that looked at CRA in Central Appalachia, where we mapped Central. So we have West Virginia, we have a little bit of South Carolina and Appalachia, some North Carolina and Virginia. We mapped the banks in Central Appalachia and looked at the types of investments and lending they were doing. I mean, we wanted to see how it looked in that area, number one. We also have a strong interest in the relationship between CRAs and CDFIs. And so Bob told me to say that, so
Thank you.
Check, I just said it. So for example, in South Carolina, we have 19 CDFIs that partner closely with the banks on lending. So we do that type of research where we want to look and see how it's covered in an area. So that's one area that we have coming out soon.
I would just say that be a good idea for any of you who want to engage more directly with banks to start by contacting the OCC's Community Affairs Officer. I'm guessing that Jeannie would recommend doing the same with the FDIC and the Federal Reserve. Each of us have the listing of our community affairs offices or staff around the country on our websites, and let us know that you're interested in attending outreach sessions that we might have around identifying unmet community needs that we do periodically, where we bring people such as yourselves in a room with bankers, and it's opportunity for those in the community to say, we have a particular need in South Carolina for a bank to fund a digital literacy program in whatever city or towns. And meetings like that can really help expose you to potential partners.
And if I could build on that, your last comment, and just coming back, Jeannie, you mentioned CDFIs. I was wondering if you and Barry could quickly explain the unique role they play in the CRA ecosystem and some of the latitude they have so that banks are not the only entity that complies with CRA and can make investments. And they have some interesting geographic flexibility that my understanding is unique. Is that?
Well, so CDFIs could be, so they're community-based financial institutions. And like I said, South Carolina, we have 19 of them. So you could have a credit union that's a CDFI. You could have a standalone CDFI. We actually, in South Carolina, we have a collaborative of CDFIs called the South Carolina Community Capital Alliance. Our website, richmondfed.org, we survey those CDFIs to find out information. We publish a report. We did a paper on some of these collaboratives across the country. It's another way of making lending in underserved areas. So the CDFI teams up with the bank. The bank capitalizes that CDFI and they lend. Some are housing, some are small business. They can have a different focus area, just like a bank has a different strategy, but it gives you another whole group of financial institutions with which to interact.
Barry, do you want to comment about CDFIs? Because I think your agency, the Treasury Department, does it not certify CDFIs?
Well, that's right. There is a process that the U.S. Treasury Department follows where an organization that is a community development financial institution, such as the type that Jeannie mentioned, can meet certain criteria in terms of their board and geographic areas that they commit to serve, and then they can get a certification from the Treasury Department, and that certification then qualifies them to apply for grants, or in the case of when they're partnering with a bank, the bank could apply for a grant for having worked with that CDFI and having been successful in serving, a significant number of underserved communities or persons, through that partnership. So that's called the BEA, the Bank Enterprise Award Program, and the other one is just a capital grant from the CDFI fund. But to get either a bank money through that initiative, through a partnership, or from the CDFI getting a grant from the Treasury, they have to start off by being certified. The good news is there's about 1,000 of them in the country. I'm guessing from what Jeannie said, there's probably about, between 15 and 20 in the state of South Carolina. But just imagine there's 1,000 of these entities throughout the country. So you can go to the Treasury Department's website, look under the CDFI fund. They have a listing by state of all the CDFIs that are operating around the country. And then there's also another organization called the Opportunity Finance Network. There's an organization called the Opportunity Finance Network, which is a coalition of CDFIs that have formed an association, and you can go to their website and actually search by geography and type of activity, and it will come up with the names of organizations and the kinds of programs they offer. So definitely, to Bob's point, be aware that the CDFI may be a potential partner for some of the work that you do.
Barry, in your previous answer, you talked about opportunities to talk to CRA people. I noticed that beginning today, there are a series of 10 meetings around the country regarding background information about the CRA. Are those different meetings than what you previously described? Or are they the same?
Well, let's see.
There's one here today.
Yeah, there's
in
one
Washington.
here today. No, one of our community affairs officer, Jeannie, were you at the meeting?
I didn't attend.
Okay, well, our community affairs officer from Boston came down, Bonita Irving, and I would say over the course of the next 12 months, we'll be holding, I don't know the exact number, but I would say 10 is a good guess, of sessions like this. We call them listening sessions, where bankers come, community groups come, and it's a listening opportunity for the banks to hear what the needs are, and to get to some of the point that Jeannie made earlier about a little bit of a matchmaking between, the bank might come and say, well, we're looking for a partner to do, digital inclusion. Is anybody here interested? That's the kind of back and forth that takes place. How do you find out about them? Again, make contact with your community affairs officer, with the 3 agencies. I will say that on occ.gov, we list all of our outreach events. And so you can always go to occ.gov and go to the community affairs page. And on any given day, you'll probably see 10 events listed over the next 60 days. So there's any number of ways to connect in with this.
Well, no, I thought the technician was going to ask a question.
Do you have a question, Dustin? Okay.
No.
No, we're good.
Let me ask, I think, to sort of wrap up, question would be, what can we do? What can National Collaborative for Digital Equity, as well as other similar groups, how can we help the banks, with respect to, the challenges we're facing in terms of the digital divide? I think your advice and perspectives would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think, I think when you leave this conference and you go back, if you reach out to the regulators and let us know that you'd like to have this maybe in a local area, we do. The FDIC, the OCC, and the Federal Reserve across the country, we do programs together all the time. We can do a CRA crash course that's an hour. We can do one that's 8 hours. It depends on how long you want to listen to us. And we can set up these meet and greets with the banks. And what I would say is what you should do is, again, kind of have that idea written down on a one-pager so that you can succinctly, present that. But if we have a collaborative, we can bring these groups in, like you talk about what's going on in the community. There's just a multitude of ways we can connect you to those bankers. The bankers are very receptive to getting those ideas. So I think we just need to be able to hear from you about doing that in your local area.
Well, the only thing I would say, and it's more related to a role that you can play, absent the presence or involvement of a banker, is to engage with us, the OCC, in our process of modernizing and updating the CRA regulations, so it's more accommodating of the kinds of activities that you're engaged with to reduce the digital divide and to increase financial inclusion, particularly, around the online access issues. So, Bob and I talk frequently, and he's been aware of this process as it's gone along. I don't think what has happened yet, because we don't actually have a rule out, is to get comment letters on that rule, to the extent that you see, very significant interest in advancing your cause to make your elected officials know that CRA modernization can really help achieve some of the goals that you're trying to achieve. And this is federal elected officials, not, this is not a state initiative. So it's commenting on making very clear what you want to see in the CRA that we're proposing, and then helping elected officials know that this is important to you.
Well, I want to, I think on behalf of all of us, express our deep appreciation to you, Barry and Jeanne. We know how incredibly busy you both are to spend this time with us and to be in this open forum. And I would like for all of us to express appreciation to them for what they do.
This was fabulous. Thank you.